to show that people with a disability, like myself, still live normal lives despite what society makes it out to be. And for the ones that know life struggles all too well, you're not alone. I've shot this video 4 times now and never could get the message across the way I wanted to, so I decided to come somewhere where I feel most at home.
When I was 12 years old, I had a lot of unexpected events come about that completely changed my life. 10 years ago, I started experiencing blurry vision in the right eye, and it pretty much came out of nowhere. I remember it was actually towards the end of hunting season, and I was hunting is when I noticed it. But the first thing that I thought it probably was, or my dad actually thought it was maybe a scratch in the lens because I was so active in the outdoors. So it kind of blew it off for a couple weeks. Then come right around January, it didn't go away. So I made an appointment with the eye doctor, and I don't remember the name of her. It was actually in Powhatan. The first thing she said, gave me a pair of glasses and said, come back in 2 weeks and we'll see what happens. When I put the glasses on, it did not change the vision whatsoever. So I came back in 2 weeks, and she told me she just got to send me off to a specialist, and that was Dr. Levi. After he ran a bunch of tests, he came up with the conclusion, pocket of fluid behind the eye, and it was above his pay grade apparently, because lo and behold, he sent me to another doctor. And that was with Retina Eye Institute of Virginia. After all the tests were done with the doctor at the Retina Eye Institute, he came with the conclusion that there was no pocket of fluid behind the eye, and he said we're probably going to have to get an MRI done, and he referred me to his colleague, Dr. Haynes with VCU. It was at this point when I kind of realized that there was something a little more serious going on here. None of us really had any answers, but it was just kind of like, this ain't just something going on with my eyes, it's something a little more serious. When I had the appointment with Dr. Haynes, he ordered a 5-day course of intravenous steroids. As I was sitting here editing this video, I realized I missed one key point here. I had an MRI done before the steroids that showed there was inflammation in the optic nerve. Dr. Haynes was trying to rule out a number of different medical conditions. One of them was cancer. And at that time, I was scared as hell just to even so much as get a shot. Even the IV, hell no, I won't about that. I hated needles, and I was scared as hell just to go to the hospital and get a 5-day course of steroids. Ended up getting the steroids done. It wasn't super terrible, kind of sucked, but it was nowhere near as bad as what was coming up ahead. Dr. Haynes wanted to follow the steroids up with an MRI, and the results of that MRI is when we got the news. Coming out of that appointment is when shit got real for me. I remember talking to the doctor, and he was showing me a picture of like a needle hanging out of somebody's chest was what a port was, and having to hear that I had to get surgery and get a port put in. That was pretty scary at 13 years old, I ain't even gonna lie. And I remember looking at the doctor and I said, how long am I gonna be on chemo for? And he looked at me and said, 1 year. And I was just like, damn, there goes 1 year of my life doing this. My first dose of chemotherapy was my last week of school on a Wednesday. It went pretty smoothly, and it was actually, oddly enough, when we went to go see Dr. Khan, we were in there damn near all day. And we were like, man, why does it take so long for this? And we learned the hard way of how such a long process it is, because it was sad in the Nelson Clinic. There was a lot of sick kids that were even worse off than me, had a lot of screwed up stuff going on. Day of chemo went smooth. I was supposed to get a prescription filled for Zofran, which is a nausea medication, because I was on vankristine and carboplatin. And carboplatin does cause nausea and throwing up and all that. One of the nurses failed to fill that prescription, so that night I woke up and I was throwing up all night. And that just kind of showed me what the future was going to hold, being on these drugs. The day after chemo, I didn't go to school for obvious reasons. I was not feeling good. The last day, I usually never went because it was a half day. But I learned real quick not to take anything for granted. Going into the summer, I was in the induction phase, which is 10 weeks of chemo every single Wednesday, unless my blood levels dropped. It's safe to say every time I got chemo, I was down and out. I was just sick, throwing up constantly. I didn't eat or drink much because most of the time I was really nauseated. I remember vividly one time coming home from the hospital. I got home 5 o'clock on Wednesday. and I was in bed till pretty much Sunday morning. It was actually my mom that came in my room and was like, hey, you gotta get out of bed today. I didn't eat anything, and I was pretty much asleep throughout most of the day, and then up during the night throwing up. Yeah. After I got through the first couple of weeks of chemo, it got to the point where anxiety started becoming an issue. Even just as soon as we got close to the hospital, my stomach would be in knots, my chest started getting tight, and I would start getting really nauseous before I even got to chemo. One of the nurses actually had a conversation with the doctor. Was like, well, let's try giving him Ativan before he has chemo to try to calm him down a little bit, because I started having panic attacks, and that's what they were telling me it was. And it was more or less my body responding to it knew what was about to come. What would normally feel like a 10-minute walk from the parking deck to the Nelson Clinic, most days was like a blink of an eye. I usually just walked around the hospital because I hate the smell of the inside the hospital. I don't know anybody that's ever been to MCV, which is now VCU. That's a really nasty hospital. Just to give you a rundown of what getting chemo looked like, at least for me, everybody's experience is completely different. I would check in with reception at the front desk in the Nelson Clinic, and usually that just felt like a blink of an eye too. I remember just sitting there hearing the clock tick on the wall, and it's just like, damn, this sucks. So I know what's about to go down. I had 2 awesome nurses, and both of them absolutely loved their job and their patients, and they took really good care of everybody in the Nelson Clinic, and that was Sarah and Eileen. Really amazing nurses. So the first thing that they would do as soon as I got there is go ahead and access the port, and they would flush it with saline. They would take my blood, send that down to, I guess it was the pharmacy, whoever took care of labs or whatever. Check my blood labs, and then if my blood labs looked good, they would order the chemotherapy. And the chemotherapy for me would usually run for about 45 minutes on the pump, and with a 5-minute flush. And then the worst part, what I absolutely hated, is they would have to flush the port with heparin or Heplock in order to keep the port from having a blood clot. And then after that, I was free to go home. Needless to say, I spent a lot of that summer in bed, but despite being on chemotherapy, I still was able to do one of my favorite things, and that was backpacking. I actually had a group of family friends we used to go, and still on chemo, I still went backpacking. My attitude throughout this whole thing is it could always be worse. There's always somebody out there that has it far worse than me throughout even just this whole entire journey that I've been through. And that's a great mentality to have going through anything. The school year came rolling around, going into 8th grade. I had the option to be on homebound, and I turned it down because, like I said earlier, I learned really quick not to take anything for granted. I wanted to go to school as much as I could. Right around this time, I finished the 10-week induction phase, and I was going into 4 weeks on, 2 weeks off, which was really awesome. Those first 2 weeks I had off of chemo felt like a vacation for me, and I just ate whatever I want, did whatever I want, and it was honestly just kind of a really freeing feeling. It wasn't long after the school year started I developed a new symptom. Whenever I was walking to and from class or doing anything physical, that my body heated up, the vision got blurry in the left eye. And as soon as I cooled down, the vision came back, and the vision always stayed blurry in the right eye, but that was where the tumor was in the right optic nerve. And of course, kids get curious. It was pretty obvious to know that I was missing a lot of school. That was one question I got asked a lot. Most of the time, I just kind of avoid the conversation. I don't know why, but I've always been embarrassed about this whole situation throughout all of it, because I never just told anybody, because I didn't want anybody to feel sorry for me. I was like, I always had the mentality of, Daddy ain't raise a bitch, just keep on moving. Getting to around Christmas time, the vision started being affected in the left eye all the time. It didn't matter whether I got hot or not, the vision was affected in both eyes. We had an MRI that did confirm that the tumor spread to the left optic nerve as well, and which I had a lot of questions at that point. I was like, well, if I'm on chemotherapy, then why is the tumor spreading to the left optic nerve? And we never really got any answers from that. Dr. Khan still wants to continue with the chemotherapy, despite what he said. He actually wanted to be more aggressive with the chemo, which is definitely something that me and my parents were completely unsure about, because it made no sense to us. I don't really remember the exact timeline of these events. It's kind of blurry. It's been 10 years. At some point, we had stopped the chemotherapy, and actually my dad had to get nasty with Dr. Khan because he was very adamant for some reason of me getting the chemotherapy that day. So we stopped the chemo. We ended up going to Johns Hopkins Hospital to seek another opinion. That was pretty much an all-day excursion for us, especially me living all the way in Powhatan. The first visit I had with him, he was very cocky and arrogant and didn't have any answers for us. I have no idea why we went up there a second time, but it was a complete waste of time. The next thing that I had done was a spinal tap. The whole goal of getting the spinal tap done was to see if there was any cancerous cells or inflammation cells in the spinal fluid. And test results came back. There was no cancer cells. It was just inflammation cells. But I tested negative for multiple sclerosis. At this point, there was nothing else to do but keep going to the Nelson Clinic to get the port flushed once a month to keep from a blood clot happening. And I was still seeing Dr. Haynes, and I was on a lot of steroids at this point in time. I want to say I was on prednisone on a daily dose at this point, just to try to keep the inflammation down. It wasn't until that springtime the vision got worse. It was a relapse. I got admitted to the emergency room. That was a whole long process in and of itself. It wasn't until 1 o'clock in the morning where I received the first dose of steroids, because I had multiple resident doctors running tests on me, looking in the back of my eyes, this, that, and the fifth, and they had 1,000 questions for me when we didn't know anything really what was going on. One of the doctors that was there at that time, he went to run an MRI. The MRI results came back, and he sat down with me, pulled the scans up, and the first thing he kind of said is, sometimes in the practice of medicine, we make mistakes. So this was never cancer. By the results of your MRI, you have MS, multiple sclerosis. The first thing my mom said is, what the fuck? Because that was a huge mistake that Dr. Khan made. And even Dr. Haynes should have caught that right then and there, because that was his specialty. I was pretty much thrown back to the wolves. I had no answers, and there was nothing treatment-wise I could really do until I started seeing Dr. Miller. I'll get to that in a second. That summer I had surgery to get the port taken out. And actually, there's a scar from it right there. And oddly enough, I was doing another round of steroids. I pretty much lived on that shit. I started seeing Dr. Miller. The first thing she wanted to do is get me on some kind of therapy for the MS. I started on a daily injection of Copaxone, which I wasn't a very big fan of. At this point, I had plenty of needles. I was tired of getting stabbed all over the place. But I had to be on something. And I was starting to gain a lot of weight because of steroids, so I had plenty of fat to do the injections in. Going into high school was rough, trying to overcome the vision loss and MS. Surgery to get the central line put in was nowhere near as bad as the port, but I was still hurting a little bit, but nowhere near as bad as trying to get the port put in. I took it that easy that weekend after surgery, but just sitting around the house got to me. I remember Sunday afternoon I actually ended up calling my buddy Nathan up. And I was like, hey, let's go run some bank lines down at the pond. And even my mom was like, you should probably just take it easy this weekend. But even with 2 tubes hanging out my chest, I was in a little 12-foot John boat and we were fishing till sundown. I had a blood test done for LHON, Leber's hereditary optic neuropathy, and that test came back positive. And LHON basically explains perfectly what I had going on. It was just central vision loss of starting with the right eye, then moving on to the left eye, and vice versa. Dr. Miller was really shocked. I got those test results came back, and she was like, why wasn't this caught before? In January, I noticed huge benefits from the plasmapheresis, so that had been several months later. I remember even Dr. Haynes made a comment on the visual acuity had gotten a lot better. So that was a good thing. I still did not have the ability to run, and that was due to the MS. So I never did gym class in high school, which that to me right there was embarrassing, because the last thing I wanted to do was just be sitting out and not be able to do any kind of physical activity like that. The MS started to make itself more apparent, and it went from to where I couldn't run to where I started having balancing problems, and I could only walk or stand for so long before I had to sit down. I also get asked that question a lot, is at what point do you have to sit down? It varies from day to day and on how severe my symptoms are that day. Like I said, I had gained a lot of weight, so I wanted to make it my mission that summer to stay more active. I tried to walk every single night, even despite the heat and that playing a factor on me, and I would push myself every single time to walk a little further. And it wasn't always sunshine and shit and rainbows. There was many times where I fell and bloodied up my hands and knees, but it was all part of the process. Despite the heat during the summer taking a toll on my body, I didn't let it stop me being active in the outdoors. I still lived a somewhat normal life as a kid growing up in the country. I loved to fish. I loved riding four-wheelers. The outdoors is where I've always found peace in everything I've ever went through. Look at here, I was a big boy my freshman year, eating like straight shit, drinking Gatorade, sweet tea, all that. And because I decided to do something about that, I dropped back down to like 145. Now, getting taller probably had some factors in there, and Dr. Miller was really happy about that. She said that would potentially help my balance and walking a little bit because I'm getting a lot of weight off there. So she was happy about that, and so was I. I felt a lot better about myself. At the start of the school year, I had another relapse, and that really started to kick my ass. I did have another round of steroids, and I'm not going to cover every single relapse I had just because there was so many of them, and they all pretty much ended the same way. I did steroids 3 to 5 days with maybe a 10-day taper. My doctor recommended I start doing physical therapy, so I did. It helped out a lot, but even with the physical therapy helping, I still had a lot of stiffness and weakness in the legs. Fatigue also became a significant issue. I was going to bed around 8 o'clock. Now, I think the main reason why that was, I was back on Copaxone at this point in time, but because I had lost the weight, I didn't have very many places to do the injection. Sometimes I would hit a vein, and that causes injection site reactions. One of the things Dr. Miller recommended was taking Benadryl an hour before the shot, and so most of the time that just knocked me out, and I would try to fall asleep before the injection site reactions started because itchy throat, it was hard to breathe, my chest would get really tight, and it was just heart palpitation. It was a very uncomfortable feeling, so most of the time I just tried to sleep through it. As somebody that went all throughout high school fighting 2 disabilities, there's nothing that you can't say to me that I haven't heard before. All the way to having vision problems and anything to do with my walking, the way I walked, because sometimes I would have like a little bit of a limp to me because of the MS. But even though majority of the stuff that's going on with me, you wouldn't know unless I told you. And I remember back then I was young and dumb. I even had people even tell me, it was like, why do you let them piss you off? They can't find anything else to say to you, so they just go straight to that because it's an easy card to pull. You see, society has its own stereotype for what somebody with a disability looks like. They make most of us look like we're just dumbasses and like we can't do anything to fend for ourselves or still live a normal, independent life. And that's far from the truth, because I know quite a few other people that are worse off than me, and they're more capable than 99% of normal, healthy people. Also, along with that, society also kind of makes it out to be that if somebody has a disability, now everybody's completely different. I understand there's some people that probably need somebody to be a little more compassionate with them and what they're going through, but I think sometimes they tend to be a little overbearing and like way too soft towards people like us and not just treating us like normal, healthy people. I experienced this with a lot of teachers that I have that may have not noticed that they were doing this, but they acted as if I was less and like I was stupid. And like I said, they probably don't notice that they're doing it, and I don't take offense to it whatsoever. But it was just kind of like, some people would give me a weird vibe, almost like they were looking down on me, as if I'm not capable of doing certain things. But on the flip side, I also had a lot of teachers that saw the value that I had and the mindset that I've had throughout all this, and I've always really appreciated those ones that really pushed me to be a better version of myself. One of the worst things that I did back then was let other people place limiting beliefs on me. I've heard it, like I said, I've heard it all. People making up excuses, telling me that I can't do this because of my vision, I can't do this because of the heat and the MS, so on and so forth. And the only limitations you have are the ones that you place upon yourself. I've talked a lot about how I never let the physical limitations that I have limit me from doing the things that I love. But also with that, there was many times I can count that my MS was slowing me down quite a bit. I had a lot of relapses all throughout high school that every single one pretty much slowed me down, and which oftentimes led to depression. I couldn't stand just sitting there and not being able to get up and do whatever I wanted. I say all this to keep it real because it wasn't always just like what I've talked about. There was definitely a lot of hard times that I had to overcome. Most of the time it was the MS that held me back from doing things that I wanted to do, or just in life in general. The biggest thing that the vision problem held me back from was not getting my license. Not being able to drive held me back quite a bit from getting around because I lived out in the country. But thankfully I had good family and friends that helped me out whenever it came to getting to doctor's appointments, infusions, and just doing whatever that I wanted to do. Definitely had a lot of friends that come pick me up and then I get to go do cool shit with. And most of the time we're in badass places like this. This is where I find peace anyways. I remember watching all my buddies get their license, buy their first truck, putting a lift, tires, and wheels on that, and that is the one thing that I missed out on that I've always wanted, was be able to get my own truck and do whatever the hell I wanted to it. And just having that sense of freedom and be able to do whatever, whenever. And also, one thing we do around here is you get pissed off, you just go for a ride, and I wonder what that's like. Alright, so this was a big turning point for me. My senior year, I decided to start working out. And I'd worked out before a little bit in high school, but nowhere near being consistent with it. Now, I covered the fact that I couldn't drive, so I couldn't get to a gym. I had a little home gym set up in my garage, which some people don't even have that. I'm thankful to have that. So there was times where it was freezing cold in there, and it got a little hot in there in the summertime, but I didn't care. I knew I had to get it in. And the main reason why I started was more or less for the mindset that it would give me and being active. And secondly, just mentally, you will feel so much better when you're working out on a consistent basis. So usually I would lift a couple times a week, and then every night I would go for a walk. Even if it was dark and it was cold outside, I'd throw a sweatshirt on, I'd be out there walking in the dark and it was cold. I mean, some people were even calling me crazy, and I wasn't walking super long distances, but enough to where I could push myself. And the funny thing is, I noticed on nights that I did that, my walking was better the next day. So I learned over the course of time, it's a balance of listening to your body and also pushing yourself too, along with hydration and eating good. Now, there was definitely a lot of obstacles with fitness. The biggest one being fatigue. It is so bad that you can pretty much forget me working out that day. And another one is to walking. There's other times where I'm jacked up, ready to go, hammer it down, and my legs are just weak, and I gotta sit down, and it's just a constant battle between them. But either way, I'm not gonna let that stop me. I'm a fighter. I never did get super jacked or ripped up with muscle. It was a constant battle of losing muscle and gaining muscle, even still this day. There's a lot of people that are worse off than me. To say that I'm thankful for the health that I do have is an absolute understatement, because I've heard the stories of other people. There's some people that just can't even do the things that I can do. After graduating high school, life came with a whole new set of challenges, and that landed me at my first job at Rapid Manufacturing, which was a machine shop about 10 minutes from my house. At Rapid, I ran CNC machines, and I don't know how to explain it. We manufactured a wide variety of different parts, anywhere from, we could pretty much make anything out of plastic or metal with these CNC machines. But I noticed within that first day that I would get to a point where the weakness was pretty severe in my legs, and I was like, damn, I need to sit down. But once I pushed kind of past that point, it was like my body was like, all right, well, we got to keep going. And I mean, it's really hard to explain. So many people ask me about this too all the time, and I don't know how to explain it. Undoubtedly, at the end of the day, it was a struggle to walk. And the first thing I always want to do is take a shower and then just sit down and chill for a little bit. I took pride in showing up every day and working my ass off. And realistically, just being able to work, it gave me kind of a sense of normalcy and a not so normal life. Over time, it seemed like my body was adapting to working like that, and a lot of things became, I wouldn't say necessarily easier, but I was a lot more efficient at what I was doing during the day. There was a lot of new tasks that they gave me that were a lot more physically demanding, and I was able to do them efficiently. Everything went pretty smooth until January 2019, where I had the most severe relapse I've had to date. In some ways, I'm still fighting. The first symptom I got in the relapse was numbness in my feet, and I noticed it after I'd gotten off work one night and I decided to work out. It was like a Friday, and I could tell I pushed myself a little too hard. Next day, my feet were a little numb, but I didn't pay attention to it, and I continued to push myself a little too hard, which probably should have listened to my body. By Monday, as soon as I woke up to go to work, I could feel it, that walking, my balance and my walking was definitely off. It was pretty bad, but I went off to work anyways. I remember that morning pretty vividly. I was unloading a lot of heavy stuff. As I went about the morning, my walking and numbness became pretty severe to do. I probably shouldn't have been working that day. Right before lunch, Doug, who I worked with, came up to me and said, "Damn, Lee, you look like you're about to collapse," which is exactly how I felt in that moment. And he told me that I probably should go home and rest, and I told him, I said, "I ain't going home." So I'll finish the day out. He went out of his way to go talk to Ron. He had my best interest at heart, I reckon. And he came back up to me and said, "Look, if you decide to go home, holler at Ron and just let him know." I said, "I already talked to him." So I clocked out for lunch, and I always took lunch with my buddy Austin, the one that lives right up the road from me. He looked at me and said, "Dude, you probably should go home." He said, "I'll take you home right now. Just go tell Ron." And he said, "I'll take you home." So I ended up going home that day. The first thing I did was go take a shower, and I could barely stand up just the amount of time I was taking a shower. And I pretty much just fell into my bed and just lay there for a while, just like, damn, this sucks. The next day, that Tuesday, the issues didn't go away. After lunch, I had to go home again. And I actually ended up talking to Debbie, which was one of my other bosses. And she looked at me and said, "Take the rest of the week off, get some rest." She said, "Your job's not going anywhere." She said, "I want you to take care of yourself first," which really meant a lot. In the meantime, I ended up getting a hold of my doctor. I did a 5-day course of prednisone. In most circumstances, prednisone helped out a lot to get me back to baseline per se and help manage those symptoms and the inflammation going on in that time frame. But this time around, it did not help whatsoever. Luckily, I was able to manage getting an appointment with my doctor to see him in person, and he could tell that I was in some pretty rough shape. So we decided to do a 3-day course of intravenous steroids. Dr. O decided to do a 3-day course of intravenous steroids, and with that, he also gave me 10 days off of work, a doctor's note for 10 days off of work, and to try to give my body some rest and see if the drug would maybe have a delayed effect, and hopefully it would take a full effect within that 10 days. The second day of the steroids was a huge relief, and I was like, hell yeah, I'm gonna go back to work, getting back to baseline. The third day, symptoms started to kind of come back in a way, and I was like, damn. But I had a few more days just to kind of rest and recover from it, so there was a lot of hope that I was gonna get better from it. I took 10 days rest and just took it easy before getting back to work. After I got back to work, I wouldn't say I was completely back to baseline. I was a little better, but it was pretty clear that I guess this relapse was here to stay for a little bit, and that it was going to take some work to kind of overcome this. The numbness was pretty much the backside of my leg all the way down into my feet, and I wouldn't wish that feeling on anybody because it's by far the worst feeling. As time progressed, things started to go a little bit more downhill to where I could still work, but after work, my legs were shot. I remember several times where just trying to take the next step was a struggle. It was almost like I was just having to just take one step at a time because I had drop leg in my right foot, which is when you can't really put your foot up when you're walking. So I was limping pretty bad, and I remember a couple of times that I had tears running down my face because it just got to the point I was like, damn, this damn near might put me into a wheelchair. Just physically, I was beat. One thing that I used to benefit from earlier on was a heavy 5-day course of intravenous steroids followed with a 10-day taper of prednisone, which is a whole hell of a lot of steroids. I remember being very heavy hitting. So later on, this was like September, I ended up asking my doctor for it, and he said, "Yeah, I think this is probably something that we should give you, try to really combat the inflammation and see if we can get you back to baseline." Just within the first, after 3 days of having the steroids, I see an immediate difference. I remember thinking to myself, I was just like, damn, I'm doing so good, maybe this was just taking a toll on my body. I hadn't been that good since prior to the relapse even happening. After the 5-day course of steroids, I hit the ground running. I was better than I had been all year, and I was like, hell yeah, we're ready to rock. Went to work Monday morning. The company had some issues that I'm not going to talk about, and Debbie put me on temporary layoff with the intention to hire me after the new year. And there was a whole bunch of people that just got laid off. It was a mess. But I kind of took that as a sign that I had a purpose in somewhere else. It was killing me to the point where I felt like I was going to be in a wheelchair. Luckily, I was able to contribute value to the family business. My old man has a remodeling business. Since then, it's had its ups and downs, but that's all part of the process. I'm going to stay loyal to taking care of myself, and one day I'll be able to run a mile again. That's the goal, along with a whole bunch of solely wanted to put this out there just to help anybody else out there with disability or going through real shit in life.
Now, this story ain't got no miracles from having ending to it. The story is still being written. I plan to continue to document this journey along the way. But always remember, some stars are falling, some stars are shooting. With faith the size of a mustard seed, find a mountain and you can move it.